The distant howl of a wolf carried on the moonlit breeze as Harriet Reed knelt beside the wounded stranger, her hands steady despite the whispers that followed her like shadows through the small town of Cottonwood Springs. It was 1876, a time when the West was still wild and untamed, when a woman living alone with knowledge of herbs and healing was just a witch's trial waiting to happen. "Don't move," she instructed, her voice firm as she examined the bullet wound in the man's shoulder. "You've lost a lot of blood." The stranger's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of a summer sky. Despite his pain, a weak smile tugged at his chapped lips. "Madam, I reckon I'm already dead and lookin' at an angel." "Save your breath," Harriet muttered, though a flush crept up her neck. "And save your charm for someone who might be swayed by it." She had found him at dawn, collapsed near the stream where she gathered her herbs, his blood staining the rocky ground beneath him. He wore the dust-covered clothes of a cowboy boots worn from too many miles, a bandana now soaked through with sweat, and a hat that had tumbled away in whatever struggle had led to his current state. With considerable effort, she had managed to bring him to her small cabin on the outskirts of town, knowing full well what the townsfolk would say if they knew. Harriet Reed, that strange woman, taking in a stranger, probably using his blood for her wicked spells. The man grimaced as she cleaned his wound. "Name's Finn Quigley." "I didn't ask," she replied, though she filed the name away. "Harriet Reed, now be quiet while I work." Finn Quigley was handsome. She had to admit tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-kissed skin and a strong jaw currently shadowed with several days' growth of beard. But handsome men were often the most dangerous, especially to women like her who lived on society's edges. As she worked to extract the bullet, using tweezers heated in the fire, Finn bit down hard on the leather strap she'd placed between his teeth. His face went pale, but he didn't cry out a small mercy, as she didn't need any passing travelers hearing a man's screams coming from her cabin. "There," she said as the misshapen piece of metal finally came free. She dropped it into a small dish with a metallic ping. "You're lucky. The bullet missed anything vital. Doesn't feel lucky," Finn managed, his breath coming in short gasps. "Being shot never does," Harriet replied dryly. She reached for a jar of salve made from yarrow, comfrey, and other herbs gathered under the full moon, not for any mystical reason, despite what the townsfolk might believe, but simply because that's when she had time to herself, away from judging eyes. As she spread the salve on his wound, Finn studied her face. "You've done this before." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes, Army nurse during the war." "No." She began to wrap clean bandages around his shoulder. "My father was a doctor. He taught me what he could before he died." That was the simple version. The truth was more complicated, involving a father who'd been shunned by his profession for his radical ideas about medicine, a mother who'd known the healing properties of every plant in the forest, and a community that had turned on them both when fever took half the town despite their efforts to save them. "You should rest," she told him, rising to her feet. "I'll check on you later." Finn's hand caught her wrist not roughly but with surprising strength for a man who'd lost so much blood. "Thank you, Miss Reed." His sincerity caught her off guard. "You can thank me by recovering quickly and moving on, Mr. Quigley. I don't need trouble." "What kind of trouble do you think I am?" he asked, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "The worst kind," she replied. "A man with a bullet in him usually has someone who put it there, and they're rarely the type to let unfinished business remain that way." She pulled her wrist free and moved to the fire, busying herself with preparing a broth. Behind her, she could feel his eyes following her movements. "They say there's a witch living outside Cottonwood Springs," he said after a while. "Reckon that's you?" Harriet stiffened but kept her back to him. "And if it is, then I'm mighty fortunate it was a witch who found me and not someone else." She turned to face him, expecting to find mockery in his expression, but instead discovered only genuine gratitude. It unsettled her more than scorn would have. "Rest, Mr. Quigley," she said again. "You'll need your strength." As the days passed, Finn quickly proved to be a surprisingly tolerable patient. He didn't complain about the bitter teas she made him drink, or the pain as she changed his bandages. Instead, he told her stories of the places he'd been: the snow-capped mountains of Colorado, the vast open plains of Kansas, the red rocks of Arizona Territory. "What brings you to this part of the country?" she asked on the third day, as she checked his wound for signs of infection. A shadow passed over his face. "Looking for someone, the person who shot you." "No," he said, his expression hardening. "The man who killed my brother." Harriet's hands paused in their work. "I'm sorry. 3 months ago," Finn continued, his voice low, "James was a good man. Never hurt anyone. He was driving a stagecoach when they robbed it. Shot him for no reason other than he moved too slow." "And you're tracking his killer?" Finn met her eyes. "I aim to see justice done." "Justice and vengeance aren't the same," she said softly. "Maybe not where you come from," he replied. "But out here, sometimes they have to be." She finished rebandaging his shoulder in silence, troubled by his words yet understanding them too well. Hadn't she fantasized about her own form of justice against those who had driven her family from town after town, calling her mother a witch, her father a quack? "The wound is healing well," she said, changing the subject. "Another week and you should be able to travel, eager to be rid of me." There was that smile again, the one that reached his eyes and made something flutter in her chest, a sensation she promptly ignored. "Eager to return to my peaceful existence," she corrected him. "Having a man in my home is complicated because of the witch rumors. Because you're the first person who's spoken more than 10 words to me in months that weren't related to buying my remedies or warning me about hellfire." Finn's expression softened. "Must get lonely." "I prefer it," she said quickly, too quickly. "People are difficult." "Some more than others," he agreed, "but not all of us bite." Despite herself, Harriet smiled. "No, some just get shot and expect strange women to patch them up." He laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his wound. "You got me there, Miss Reed." That evening, as she stirred a pot of stew over the fire, Finn watched her from his place on her bed, the only proper sleeping surface in the cabin. She'd been making do with a pallet on the floor, ignoring his repeated offers to trade places. "Where did you learn about herbs and such?" he asked. "My mother," she answered, keeping her eyes on the pot. "She learned from her mother and so on." "Were they all called witches too?" Harriet's stirring faltered. "Yes, my grandmother was actually tried for it back east. They didn't hang her, but she lost everything." "I'm sorry." "It's the way of things. People fear what they don't understand, and a woman who can heal without a medical degree or a husband to validate her skills, that's frightening to many." Finn shifted on the bed, sitting up straighter despite her previous admonitions to rest. "Seems to me that fear is just another word for ignorance." "Easy for you to say," she replied, ladling stew into bowls. "You're a man. The worst they'll call you is a fool. For a woman, it's witch, harlot, or madwoman, sometimes all three." She handed him a bowl, careful not to let their fingers touch. It had been so long since she'd had extended contact with another person, and something about Finn quickly made her hyper-aware of her own body, of the way her pulse quickened when he smiled, of how she found herself fixing her hair before entering the main room each morning. "How long have you lived here?" he asked between spoonfuls of stew. "Almost 2 years. Longer than anywhere else since my parents died. And the folks in town, they tolerate me because I can help with things the doctor can't or won't. Fevers, difficult births, old injuries that never healed right." She shrugged. "They cross themselves when they see me, but they still come knocking when they're desperate." "Sounds lonely," Finn said again. This time she didn't deny it. "It is what it is." That night, a storm rolled in, fierce and sudden as they often were in this part of the country. The wind howled around the small cabin, finding every crack and crevice to whistle through. Rain hammered the roof, occasionally leaking through in places where the shingles needed repair. Unable to sleep on her pallet with the cold draft seeping through the floorboards, Harriet sat by the fire, wrapped in a quilt. She thought Finn was asleep until his voice cut through the storm's noise. "You should take the bed," he said. "I can manage on the floor for one night." "You're injured," she replied without turning around, "and you're shivering. I'm fine." She heard the creak of the bed as he rose, followed by his footsteps. Then he was beside her, lowering himself carefully to the floor with a grimace. "Mr. Quigley, Finn," he corrected. "After pulling a bullet out of me, I think we're past formalities." "Finn," she said, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "You shouldn't be up." "I've slept in worse places than beside a fire with a pretty woman," he said, that charming smile making an appearance again. Harriet felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the dim light. "Flattery won't change the fact that you're risking your recovery. Maybe I'm just tired of watching you sacrifice your comfort for mine." She was about to protest when a particularly strong gust of wind rattled the shutters, sending a shower of raindrops through a leak in the roof. They landed directly on her pallet. Finn raised an eyebrow. "See, even the heavens agree with me," Harriet sighed. "Fine, we'll share the bed. It's large enough that we can both sleep without impropriety." If he was surprised by her suggestion, he hit it well. "Whatever the lady wishes." They made their way to the bed, Harriet hyper-aware of his presence as they lay side by side, a respectful distance between them, both fully clothed except for their boots. She lay rigid, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm and Finn's steady breathing. "Harriet," he said after a while, his voice soft in the darkness. "Why do you stay here if they treat you so poorly?" She considered the question. "Where else would I go? The next town, the next territory, it would be the same story, not everywhere." "Everywhere I've ever been," she countered. "Besides, there are people here who need what I can do whether they respect it or not, like me." "Yes," she admitted, "like you." Another silence stretched between them, filled with the storm's symphony. "I never believed in witches," Finn said eventually. "But if they exist, I reckon they'd be just like you women, too smart and capable for the small minds around them." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Go to sleep, Finn." But as she drifted off to the sound of rain and his breathing, Harriet realized it was the first time in years she hadn't felt entirely alone. Morning brought clear skies and an awkward awakening as Harriet discovered herself curled against Finn's uninjured side, his arm wrapped protectively around her. She extracted herself carefully, her face burning with embarrassment, though he appeared to still be asleep. The day passed in quiet activity, Harriet gathering herbs that had been washed clean by the rain, Finn insisting on helping with small tasks despite her protests. His strength was returning, and with it, the inevitable day of his departure grew closer. "Tell me about the man you're looking for," she said as they shared a simple lunch of bread and cheese. Finn's expression darkened. "Name's Elijah Blackwell, leader of a small gang that's been terrorizing stagecoaches between here and Fort Smith. Dark beard, scar across his right cheek." Harriet froze. "Blackwell, you know him," she set down her bread. "He's been to Cottonwood Springs, about a week before I found you. He and his men spent a night at the saloon, left a lot of damage behind." Finn leaned forward, wincing slightly. "Did you see which way they went?" "North, I think. There was talk about a gold shipment coming through Bailey's Crossing." His jaw tightened. "That's a day's ride from here." "You're not healed enough to ride," she said firmly. "I've ridden with worse. And reopened wounds that got infected and killed you." His stubborn expression faltered. "Harriet, he's getting farther away every day. And he'll be just as dead whether you kill him tomorrow or next week," she snapped, then immediately regretted her harsh tone. "I mean, no, you're right," Finn said, surprising her. "That is what I intend to do." "I won't lie about it. There are lawmen who haven't caught him in 3 months of trying," he interrupted. "My brother's blood is on his hands. I can't let that go unanswered." Harriet studied his face, the determined set of his jaw, the pain in his eyes that had nothing to do with his physical wound. "And after, when he's dead and your brother is still gone, what then?" Finn looked away. "I haven't thought that far ahead." "Maybe you should," she said softly. "Before you trade your future for a moment's satisfaction." That evening, as Harriet prepared a fresh poultice for his wound, rapid hoofbeats approached the cabin. She exchanged an alarmed look with Finn, who was already reaching for his gun belt hanging on a nearby chair. "Stay inside," he said, checking that his revolver was loaded. "This is my home," she protested, but he was already moving to the window, keeping to the side to peer out. "3 riders," he reported. "Armed." Before Harriet could respond, a voice called out, "Miss Reed, you in there?" She recognized the voice Samuel Wright, the general store owner, not a friend exactly, but one of the more tolerant townspeople. "What is it, Mr. Wright?" she called back, moving toward the door. "There's trouble in town," he replied. "Mrs. Peterson's having a difficult birth. Doc Wilson's away in Fort Smith. They sent me to fetch you." Harriet hesitated, looking at Finn. "I have to go." "Could be a trap," he warned. "Why would they need a trap? They know where I live." She reached for her bag of supplies. "Besides, Sarah Peterson is expecting her first child. If there are complications." Finn's expression softened. "Then go, but I'm coming with you. You're injured, not helpless." He strapped on his gun belt. "I'll ride as escort, then wait outside while you do your work." She wanted to argue but knew that time was precious in a difficult birth. "Fine, but you stay on your horse and keep that wound clean." They rode into town, Harriet on her mare, Finn on the horse Samuel had brought for her, with the store owner leading the way. Dusk was falling, casting long shadows between the buildings of Cottonwood Springs. Eyes peered from windows as they passed, curious and wary at the sight of the town witch and the stranger accompanying her. The Peterson home was on the far side of town, a modest house with lamplight glowing from every window. Inside, the air was thick with tension and the sounds of Sarah's labored breathing. "Thank God," Mrs. Peterson Sr. said when Harriet entered, though she made the sign of the cross as she did so. "She's been at it for hours. The baby won't come." Harriet set her bag down. "I need clean water, towels, and privacy." "Privacy." "But I'm her mother-in-law." "Privacy," Harriet repeated firmly. "You can wait outside the door." After the older woman left, muttering under her breath about impropriety, Harriet turned to the pale young woman on the bed. "Sarah, I'm going to help you, but you need to trust me." Sarah nodded weakly, her face shining with sweat. They say you're a witch." "Does that matter right now?" Harriet asked gently. "No," Sarah whispered. "Just save my baby." For the next 2 hours, Harriet worked tirelessly, using her knowledge to turn the breech baby and guide Sarah through the delivery. Outside, she could hear the murmurs of the gathered family members and occasionally Finn's deep voice, though she couldn't make out what he was saying. Finally, as the grandfather clock in the hallway struck 10, a newborn's cry filled the room. Harriet cleaned the baby girl, wrapped her in a soft blanket, and placed her in her exhausted mother's arms. "She's perfect," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, she is," Harriet agreed, a lump forming in her throat. These were the moments that made the whispers and suspicion worthwhile. When she emerged from the bedroom, allowing the family to rush in to meet its newest member, she found Finn standing with his back to the wall, his face pale but his eyes alert. "All well?" he asked quietly. "Mother and daughter both," she confirmed. "You should be resting." "I'm fine." His eyes searched her face. "You look tired. Bringing new life into the world is exhausting work." She picked up her bag. "We should get back before your wound starts bleeding again." As they stepped outside, they found a small crowd had gathered, whispering among themselves. Most nodded respectfully to Harriet, a few even murmuring gratitude for her skills temporarily outweighing their fear of her supposed witchcraft. They had just mounted their horses when a man pushed his way through the crowd, his face contorted with rage. It was John Peterson, Sarah's brother-in-law, known for his quick temper and rigid religious beliefs. "Witch," he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Harriet. "You've cursed my brother's household." "John, that's enough," someone in the crowd said. "She just saved your niece and sister-in-law." "With devil's work," John advanced, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "My mother said she sent her from the room probably to cast her spells without witnesses. Before Harriet could respond, Finn had positioned his horse between her and John. "The lady was doing her job," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "A job your town doctor couldn't do because he wasn't here." "And who are you?" John demanded. "Her demon lover." A few gasps rose from the crowd. Finn's hand hovered near his gun. "I'm someone who doesn't take kindly to men threatening women who have done nothing but help." "It's all right," Harriet said, touching Finn's arm. "Mr. Peterson is upset. It's been a stressful night for everyone." "He's threatening you," Finn argued, not taking his eyes off John. "It wouldn't be the first time," she replied quietly. "Please, let's just go." For a moment she thought Finn might refuse, might escalate the situation. But then he nodded, though his eyes remained hard as he stared down John Peterson. "If I ever hear of you bothering Miss Reed again," he said clearly enough for everyone to hear, "you'll answer to me, and I'm a lot less forgiving than she is." With that, they rode away, the crowd parting silently before them. Harriet could feel the eyes on her back all the way to the edge of town. "You didn't need to do that," she said once they were on the trail back to her cabin. "Yes, I did," Finn replied, his voice still tight with anger. "How can they treat you that way after what you just did?" "Fear is a powerful thing, so is gratitude, or should be." They rode in silence for a while, the moon lighting their path. "You're good at what you do," Finn said finally. "That baby would have died without you, maybe the mother too, I know," she said simply. "Is it worth it?" The whispers, the threats, Harriet considered the question. "When I hold a newborn baby or see fever break or watch someone walk without pain for the first time in years, yes, it's worth it." Finn looked at her with something like wonder in his expression. "You're quite a woman, Harriet Reed." The next day brought an unexpected visitor, Sheriff Thomas Mills, a gruff man in his 50s who generally left Harriet alone as long as no formal complaints were made against her. "Miss Reed," he said, removing his hat as she opened the door. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Finn standing behind her. "And you must be the stranger folks are talking about." "Finn Quigley," Finn introduced himself. "Just passing through," the sheriff nodded slowly. "With a bullet wound, I hear." Harriet tensed, but Finn remained calm. "Ran into some trouble on the trail. Miss Reed was kind enough to patch me up." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that wears a mask and demands your valuables," Finn replied evenly. "I was hoping to report it, actually. 4 men, one with a scar on his cheek. Took my money and shot me when I was slow to hand over my watch." Sheriff Mills's expression sharpened. "Blackwell's gang. They hit a stagecoach near Bailey's Crossing 2 days ago. Killed the driver." Finn's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sounds like the same men." "I've got a posse forming to go after them," the sheriff said. "They're headed for Widow's Pass, according to our tracker. If you're well enough to ride by tomorrow, we could use another gun." Harriet stepped forward. "He's not well enough." Both men looked at her. "Miss Reed," the sheriff began, "with all due respect, he was shot less than a week ago," she interrupted. "The wound could reopen, get infected. He needs at least another few days of rest." Sheriff Mills sighed. "We can't wait that long, trail's getting colder by the hour." "I'll ride," Finn said firmly. "I'll be at your office at dawn." After the sheriff left, Harriet turned on Finn, fury in her eyes. "Are you trying to undo all my work? You're not ready for a posse ride." "This is my chance, Harriet," he said. "Blackwell killed my brother. I have to be there when they catch him. Even if it kills you, it won't." "You don't know that," her voice rose. "A reopened wound exposed to dirt and sweat. Infection sets in quickly out here. You could die for your revenge." "Justice," he corrected. "Call it what you want," she snapped. "It won't bring your brother back. It will just add another grave." Finn stepped closer, his blue eyes intense. "What would you have me do? Let him go? Let my brother's murder stand unanswered?" "I would have you live," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I would have you see that there might be more to life than settling scores." Something shifted in his expression, confusion, then a dawning realization. "Harriet," she turned away, embarrassed by how much she'd revealed. "Do what you want, you will anyway." That night, they barely spoke as they prepared for bed, still sharing it. though now the arrangement felt charged with unspoken tensions. As Harriet lay staring at the ceiling, Finn's voice came softly through the darkness. "If I don't go, I'll regret it forever." She didn't respond. But he continued, "If I go and don't come back, I think I might regret that too." Harriet turned to look at him, finding his face just visible in the dim light from the dying fire. "Then don't go." "I have to," he said, "but I'm asking you, will you be here when I get back?" The question took her by surprise. "Where else would I be?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I need a reason to be careful, a reason to come back." Her heart beat faster. "Why?" In answer, he reached out, his fingertips brushing her cheek. "Because in less than a week, a witch with healing hands has done something no one else could. She's made me think about a future beyond revenge." Harriet's breath caught in her throat. "Finn, tell me I'm not alone in this feeling," he whispered. She should say no. Should remind him that she was an outcast, that he was still half a stranger, that whatever attraction existed between them was likely born of proximity and gratitude. But as she looked into his eyes, what came out instead was, "You're not alone." His kiss was gentle, mindful of his injury, but it sparked something in Harriet that had long been dormant hope. Hope that perhaps there could be more to her life than solitude and suspicion. When they broke apart, Finn rested his forehead against hers. "I'll come back to you," he promised. "And when I do, we'll figure out what comes next, together. Just be careful," she whispered. "I didn't save your life just for you to throw it away." Dawn came too quickly. Harriet watched as Finn saddled his horse, her stomach tight with anxiety. She'd reinforced his bandages, packed him extra salve and clean wrappings, and made him promise a dozen times to be cautious. "The sheriff's a good man," she said. "Let him handle Blackwell." Finn nodded, though she could see the reservation in his eyes. "I'll try." "Finn," she said, her voice serious. "You saved me too, you know." He looked puzzled. "How's that?" "I was surviving here, not living, just existing day to day." She stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palm. "You reminded me there's more." Finn covered her hand with his own. "Then I have even more reason to come back safely." He kissed her once more, lingering as if to memorize the feel of her, then mounted his horse with only a slight grimace of pain. 3 days, he said. "If we don't find them by then, the sheriff says we'll turn back." 3 days, she repeated, trying to ignore the dread pooling in her stomach. "I'll be here." She watched him ride away until he was just a speck on the horizon, then returned to her empty cabin. It felt colder somehow, quieter, as if Finn's presence had filled spaces she hadn't realized were vacant. The next 2 days crawled by. Harriet busied herself with her usual tasks, gathering herbs, preparing remedies, tending her small garden, but her thoughts constantly strayed to Finn, wondering if he was safe, if his wound was holding, if he'd found Blackwell. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, she was hanging herbs to dry when hoofbeats approached. Heart racing, she rushed outside, hoping to see Finn. Instead, it was Sheriff Mills, his expression grim. "Miss Reed," he began, removing his hat, fear clutched at her throat. "No." "There was a shootout," the sheriff continued. "Blackwell and his men were holed up in an abandoned mine. They had the high ground. Finn," she managed, "is he?" "Shot," the sheriff said, "but alive last I saw. He's with Doc Wilson in Fort Smith." Relief made her knees weak. "What happened?" "Blackwell recognized him. Turns out Quigley wasn't just a random victim. He's been tracking Blackwell for months. When the shooting started, Quigley went straight for him, despite orders to hold position." The sheriff shook his head. "Took a bullet in the leg, but he got Blackwell, dead center." "And the others?" "2 dead, 1 captured. It's over." He studied her face. "Quigley asked me to tell you he kept his promise, said you'd understand." Tears pricked at Harriet's eyes. Will he be all right?" "Doc Wilson's good. Says the wound's clean, should heal fine." The sheriff hesitated. "He also said Quigley's been asking when he can travel back this way. Seems mighty anxious to return to Cottonwood Springs for a man who was just passing through." Harriet felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you for bringing word, Sheriff," he nodded, replacing his hat. You know, Miss Reed, folks are talking different about you since that Peterson baby and the way Quigley stood up for you. It's changing minds. People don't change their minds that easily, she said skeptically. Sometimes they do when they're shown a different way to see things. He tipped his hat. Good day, Miss Reed. 2 weeks passed before Harriet heard hoofbeats again. This time when she rushed outside, it was Finn who sat atop his horse, his leg bandaged but his smile as bright as ever. You came back, she said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. I promised I would. He dismounted carefully, favoring his injured leg, and I always keep my promises. They stood looking at each other for a moment, suddenly shy despite everything they'd shared. How's your leg? She finally asked, healing. The doctor in Fort Smith said I was lucky the bullet went clean through. His eyes held hers. Though he did say his medicine didn't seem to work as well as whatever witch's brew you used on my shoulder, Harriet laughed. I doubt he called it that. Not to my face, no. Finn took a step toward her. Blackwell's dead, I know, the sheriff told me. It's done then. My brother can rest. He took another step. Now I need to figure out what comes next. And what might that be? Well, he said, reaching for her hand, I was thinking I might settle down. There's a small ranch for sale just north of town. Good land, fair price. Harriet's heart skipped. That's quite a change for a man who's been wandering. I've been looking for something without knowing what it was, he said softly. Until I found a witch with healing hands who saved more than just my life. People will talk, she warned. The respectable cowboy and the witch woman. Let them. Finn's fingers intertwined with hers. You saved me first, Harriet Reed. Everything else came after. When he kissed her this time, it held the promise of a future of shared days and nights, of a life where neither of them would be alone again. 6 months later, when they married in the small church in Cottonwood Springs with even John Peterson grudgingly in attendance, the whispers had changed. They still called her a healer, sometimes even a witch, but now it was said with respect rather than fear. And if people noticed how the new ranch bloomed with herb gardens, or how folks came from miles around for Mrs. Quigley's remedies, well, that was just the way of things in a town that had learned that sometimes. What looks like witchcraft is simply love and knowledge combined. And when Finn would introduce his wife, he'd always say with pride, This is Harriet, the remarkable woman who saved my life. Then, with a smile meant only for her, he'd add in a whisper, But she'll tell you I saved her first.